The UH-60 Lima Black Hawk helicopter. Any missions that I can perform during the day, I can also perform during the night. It can hold approximately 11 soldiers. Sling load 8,000 pounds. The aircraft cruises at 120 knots. Power plants are two GE 701 Charlie engines, 1,600 horsepower apiece. Manufactured by Sikorsky. The crew consists of four, 2 pilots, 2 crew engineers. UH-60 Lima, the Cadillac of the sky.
Sometimes war is as easy as getting from here to there. You get there first with the most and you win. Simple, right? Could be, except that nothing in war is simple. On the other side of the lines, there are bad guys who will fight and die to prevent your getting from here to there. They plan and plot and train because that's what their job is. Because moving around is as important as it is, military planners spend careers thinking about it. They fret, study, and spend taxpayer money trying to find a surefire way to get men, material, and firepower from where it is to where it should be. Even good planners come up with bad ideas. Military history is cluttered with embarrassing failures. Take, for example, the Barling bomber. It was designed based on a simple idea. To build a better bomber, build a bigger bomber. The Barling was to be the first of a generation of airborne behemoths that would allow America to strike her enemies from a safe and dignified distance. On its 1923 inaugural flight, the Barling ran into one problem: the Adirondack Mountains. The Barling couldn't gain enough altitude to get over them. The Barling quickly passed into aviation infamy, its builders into oblivion. Such is the risk of all new military systems. Working on the cutting edge of technology, mistakes happen. In 1971, the Army started searching for a replacement for the UH-1, the first utility helicopter. The Huey was a remarkable machine, an all-purpose taxicab gunship that revolutionized combat. The odds of its follow-up being as good were low. The potential for Barling-class failure, great. Still, the Army aimed high, imagining a helicopter that would be faster than the Huey, carry heavier loads, and be less vulnerable to enemy attack. It described to the aviation industry a machine with capabilities that seemed at the time nearly impossible. The Army contracted 2 prototypes. Sikorsky built the UH-60. Boeing-Vertol built the UH-61. The Army challenged the manufacturers to a duel, putting their machines through a rigorous set of tests. They fired all kinds of rounds into component parts to see how they reacted. They fired anti-aircraft rounds into fuel cells to see if they would leak. They dropped fuel cells from 50-foot cranes. They piled troops in and out of them, tucked the prototypes onto transports, and shuffled them around the country. They attached pieces of the new machines to existing operational helicopters and then crashed them. December 1976, the Army announced that Sikorsky had won the competition. The Army named the new helicopter Black Hawk.
The Huey was fun, but you put somebody in a Black Hawk and very few of them will want to go back to the Huey. UH-60 is really the backbone of the Army aviation in the context of getting things where they need to be quickly. Soldiers, equipment, supplies, the wounded. It is the utility helicopter for the Army, and it serves a great range because it's got such a great payload.
The first production Black Hawks were delivered to the Army in late 1978. They had two 1,500 horsepower GE jet engines, each capable of keeping the Black Hawk flying without the other. It could climb to nearly 20,000 feet, carry a fully equipped infantry squad, and hoist artillery and small vehicles below. Though the Black Hawk had passed its first round of tests, as the new kid on the block, it still had a lot to prove. When the first generation of UH-60A crews started training in 1979, they discovered a machine vastly more capable than the Hueys they'd been flying.
It's much faster, we carry much more in terms of cargo, internally and externally. It's a more sophisticated aircraft, but it was built with ease of maintenance in mind.
Introducing something as intricate as a new flight platform poses enormous problems. There are no 1,000-hour flight veterans to pass on the tricks of this particular trade because the tricks aren't known. The system itself is a mystery. How it acts when it's hot and tired or wet and cold may have been tested, but real-world use poses dilemmas unimagined in testing. At the same time that flight crews are adjusting to their new platform, they are also learning to work with new teams.
It takes a little while. Initially when you go out flying with a new co-pilot, you're really monitoring not only the things that you need to be doing, but you're watching to see what he's going to do, how he's going to react. So when you do get out there in that situation where it is intense flying and it's at night and there's not much room for mistakes, you know what the guy's going to do.
The pilot and co-pilot sit at identical stations so that each can, when necessary, fully control the helicopter. Instrumentation is a combination of conventional, analog dials, and LED readouts.
You got your forward panel on the aircraft that gives you all your engine indications, all the vital signs of the aircraft, if you will. And then you've got your instruments that tell you your attitude relative to the earth, your altitude, how high you are above the ground, how fast you're going. And then, of course, you've got your monitoring all your avionics. It kind of looks overwhelming, at least it did for me when I first got into the aircraft.
The pilots are not simply redundant systems. When the Black Hawk moves nap of the earth, particularly at night, there is almost no margin for error.
We'll have one pilot, the one that's on the controls, he maintains visual contact with the outside of the aircraft. We don't want him looking inside too much. The other guy, he's looking in and out. He's monitoring the instruments.
Black Hawk helicopters were designed with a crew of 4 in mind. In the cabin behind the pilot and co-pilot are stations for a crew chief and gunner. In day-to-day use, the gunner is usually not assigned to the crew, but is added only for battle. The crew chief sits directly behind the co-pilot. He is in charge of everything that goes on in the back of the helicopter, from assigning passenger seats to hanging sling loads. As the aircraft takes off and lands, he is its rear-view mirror, making sure that the tail rotor will clear any obstacles.
We basically let the crew chief handle what's in back because we have so much stuff to do up front. So he's basically in charge of the back no matter what rank. The personnel in the back have to listen to him.
The Black Hawk, more than any other helicopter before it, was designed to fly and keep flying in all conditions. It is the crew chief who sees to it that that happens. He makes sure not only that it's ready to fly, but that it stays running for the duration of its mission.
when I sit back and think about it, I realize I'm pretty lucky to have this job, and it just makes me want to keep going at it, keep trying, you know, just do the best I can.
Because its main job was to fly in and out of battle, it had to be able to take a hit. It had 2 engines but could fly on one, and the drivetrain designed so that if hit, it could continue to work for an hour with no oil.
There's redundancy in many systems. It's built for if one of the systems goes out, the aircraft can survive and come back to friendly lines and be repaired.
If something did bring it down, it crashed better than any helicopter in history. Its landing gear crumpled upward, and its seats collapsed down, absorbing the force of most impacts. The crew compartment was nearly indestructible. It could hit the ground at 42 feet per second and fly the next day. The Black Hawk was also fast, with a cruising speed of 160 knots.
It's a utility aircraft, but it flies like a sports car to me, because it's the way it was designed. It's really fast. It's one of the fastest aircraft that we have in the Army inventory, and it's real maneuverable due to the rotor system and the way it was put together. We can put a lot of forces on it that you couldn't some of the older model aircraft. So we can yank and bank, as sometimes we say, and really put it to its test.
The production UH-60 differed from the prototype in several ways. Windows were changed to improve visibility. A fixed tail wheel replaced the prototype's retractable gear. The contours of the ship's body became more rounded. The engines, originally mounted atop the helicopter's body, were absorbed into it. The exhaust vents of those engines grew larger, and subsequent models had vents further modified to cool the helicopter's exhaust and decrease its infrared visibility. Though the helicopter was compact enough to fit on air transports, in times of crisis, it would be vastly more efficient if it could fly itself to a hotspot. In the Cold War atmosphere of the early 1980s, that hotspot was likely to be Central Europe. So that the Black Hawks could cross the Atlantic Ocean, the Army added removable wings that could carry up to 1,300 gallons of additional fuel. The external stores support system could also be mounted with missiles and machine guns. Except, of course, that the Black Hawk was not really a fighting aircraft. It was a utility helicopter, a delivery van. While it had won the respect of its own pilots, most of them straight off the UH-1, it had a second constituency waiting to be convinced. In the post-Vietnam specialization of aircraft, the attack function the Huey had invented was spun off to the Cobra and subsequently the Apache. The attack pilots, seldom reluctant to preen their wings publicly, liked to call the Black Hawk pilots flying cab drivers.
They've got an outstanding aircraft too, but I don't want to be on anything that can't shoot back.
Which meant that, though the Black Hawk itself had gained the respect of those around it, the Black Hawk pilots still had something very substantial to prove.
Yes, I do believe we get respect. When we deal with our fellow soldiers and maneuver battalions, maneuver brigades, we're respected, highly respected.
From the outset of its operational deployment, there was little doubt that the Black Hawk would excel at its basic mission. In 1983, it performed as advertised in its first combat deployment on the Caribbean island of Grenada. There, a Marxist regime had taken a group of American medical students hostage. Marines, on their way from the United States to the Middle East, made a slight diversion to rescue the students and depose the regime. UH-60As ferried the Marines around the island. One Black Hawk took 47 hits to crucial components: drive shafts, servos, hydraulic pumps, even the cockpit, and made it back to base. Other Black Hawks took hits to self-sealing fuel tanks, turbines, and crew compartments, and none went down. But mostly, the Black Hawks simply worked. They got people places and kept to their timetable. December 1989, Panama. After years of jousting with Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega, the Bush administration ordered a decisive invasion of that small Central American country. In Operation Just Cause, President Bush wanted not only to drive Noriega from power, but to capture him and bring him back to the United States. If that was going to happen, all avenues of escape from Panama would have to be closed off almost instantly. The dictator, called Pineapple Face by his own people, had been under pressure for years and had carefully planned his own worst-case scenarios. It was an Air Force Spec Ops variant, the UH-60G Pavehawk, that was among the first Hawks to prove itself in battle. As UH-60As distributed troops around Panama City, Pavehawks from Eglin Air Force Base inserted Navy SEALs into Patia Airfield. There, Noriega kept his personal aircraft, and there, the Panamanian Defense Forces mounted one of their fiercest stands. The SEALs took heavy fire and suffered far more casualties than anticipated. The team leader radioed for help, for medevac for the wounded, and reinforcements so that they might hold their ground. Pilots wearing night vision goggles flew toward Patia, but as they got close, they lost contact with the SEALs on the ground. They mounted a desperate search. The Panamanians could hear the aircraft, but couldn't see them in the pitch-black night. The Pavehawks headed for the sound of gunfire, found the SEALs, and landed right at the center of the firefight. Reinforcements piled off, wounded piled on, and the SEALs held their ground.
We're more of a stealth kind of aircraft. We like to get in there fast and quiet and get out, drop our soldiers off and get out. We can hold about 10 people on this aircraft with large packs, and those guys usually get inserted deep behind enemy lines.
One measure of a system's success is the number of variants that are developed, the number of different missions that the system is assigned to fulfill. Today, UH-60 variants serve a dizzying array of missions. The Air Force has Pavehawks, the Navy has Seahawks, the Coast Guard has Jayhawks. There are electronic warfare Hawks that can hover over a battlefield, using a 1,700-pound electronics package to eavesdrop on enemy command and control. The UH-60L model, which is now the standard in the Army, has bigger engines and more sophisticated avionics. It has been tested with anti-tank missiles, though its primary mission remains delivery. What attracted the planners was the Black Hawk's basic underlying strength as a system. The ability to add components to the basic airframe made it applicable to just about every helicopter mission. Ironically, one of the missions the Black Hawks do best is getting attack pilots out of trouble. When the attackers go in, they do so knowing that Black Hawks are close by, ready to get them out if they go down.
We do a lot of support for them on down aviator procedures. We do what's called combat search and rescue. So we're linked in pretty tight with those guys. It's usually planned in with a large mission like when the attack helicopters have a deliberate attack, or even if they're not on a deliberate attack, we're usually right there in the planning process.
Well, we don't have guns, but when they get shot down and the Black Hawk has to come rescue them, it makes us feel a little better. Of course, we don't want them to get shot down, but... Yeah.
It is not only helicopter pilots who are happy to have Black Hawk backup. In Kuwait, Black Hawks flew search and rescue missions for downed fighter and bomber pilots, even missing reporters. It's also worth remembering that when all is said and done, a typical Black Hawk pilot accrues about 100 hours a year more flight time than a typical Apache pilot. And flight time is, after all, what pilots live for. Needless to say, for all of the lack of respect the Black Hawks get from attack pilots, the UH-60 and its variants have become a favorite of infantrymen.
So you put them in the back of the aircraft and you take off flying low and fast because that's part of our mission.
If we're going on a long flight, they'll be back here. It'll put someone to sleep, but when that, if coming down or slams a collective down, they be peeling their stomachs off the soundproofing.
The first time you get a holler from the back or a yay or the guys screaming and hollering, you look back and you see big smiles on their face.
There's no way to describe it. Most of them expect it to be like a roller coaster. They get on here, thinking that, and we'll give them a ride, depending on what kind of mood the pilots are in. But